Good morning. Is this thing on? Good morning, and welcome to our first session, Moving from Academics to Experience to Career. Glad you're here, and welcome. This panel presentation will offer a discussion of BCC's initiatives to support students in their academic and career development, moving from academics to experience through experiential learning and finally on to careers. Dr. Koo is part of this panel, and he'll be responding to the panel members' discussion of the complexity of these efforts and that exemplify the community college mission. And rather than introduce all of these panelists myself, I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. So if we could start with David.
Good morning, Dave Slutz. I'm the president and CEO of Precise, a local manufacturing company. We've been working with BCC maybe before Jack got here, I'm not sure. Carrie actually worked for us. Carrie.
My name is Carrie Figueroa. I work at Precise in the Human Resources Department. I started there actually as a BCC co-op and then moved into a full-time position.
Good job. I'm Teresa Romanovich, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Workforce Development at BCC.
Anthony Ucci, Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs.
I'm still George Koo.
Hasn't changed.
I'm Kathy Torpy-Garganter, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Enrollment Services.
Hi, I'm Nicole Heaney, and I'm the Director of the Cooperative Education and Internship Program.
I'm Mary Zahn, Director of Civic Engagement and Professor of Psychology.
I'm Deborah Anderson. I'm a Professor of English, Coordinator for Prior Learning Assessment, and Coordinator for Developmental Reading and Writing.
Thank you very much. This session will proceed through a series of questions which will be posed generally to the panel. Some of the panelists will be more able to answer some of these questions or respond to some of them than other questions. So we shouldn't expect every panelist to be responding to every question. And Dr. Koo will be replying to some of those responses as we work through this panel. So my first question, what are the most significant academic challenges our students confront when they arrive at BCC?
I'll answer that. I'll try to answer that. I think a lot of them are academically unprepared. They don't realize what it means to be a college student. And they also have a lot of psychological barriers and self-handicapping type activities that will prevent them from success if they don't realize it and change them.
Students also have difficulty negotiating through the process of how to be admitted, fill out the financial aid, to actually get through all the things they need to know in order to actually sit in your classrooms.
I'll also throw in that particularly our traditional age students often don't have a vision of where they want to be in 5 years or 10 years or how their education is going to get them to that point.
Good. So what has a college done and what efforts are underway to meet those academic needs, those holes that our students seem to have in their preparation when they arrive here?
Can I just ask each of those who have already spoken and others, the things that you've mentioned sound familiar to me. In fact, they sound so familiar to me that they could have been said 50 years ago.
Correct.
That's true.
Right? But is there something different about this cohort or this generation that either, I mean, I know some of those things. You have far more students who are underprepared and probably a healthy proportion of those who are so underprepared that maybe 50 years ago they never would have thought about it.
They wouldn't have been in college, I don't think.
They wouldn't have been in college. So the challenges may be greater, but the general phenomenon are hold, right?
Yeah, the general phenomenon holds, but many of the opportunities that they're going to have in their future are now going to require a college education as compared to 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. You know, many of them could be very successful throughout their lives without this experience. So greater percentage really must participate if, you know, to be successful in society.
But you're also having the differences of the type of students. You have the younger generation who has some fearfulness of whether or not a college education is even going to get me a job in this economic times. So there's that, which is a different than what I was growing up when my parents felt, you have a college education, you're going to be set for life.
The world is your oyster.
The world is your oyster.
And you were set for life.
It was.
Well,
And
that's true. I mean, that's-
the other half is you have your traditional students, I mean your non-traditional students, who have such fears about coming back, and they're balancing such high-risk stakes to even come back to school, that makes it difficult for them to even ask the questions. And sometimes we assume that because they're older, they know the answers. And so we're not offering them enough pathways or enough support because we assume they should know it because they're older.
One thing I'd like to add is I've never been to a community college until I started working at one, but I was amazed at how many students, and I'm still amazed, how many students left high school, got thrown out of high school or whatever, and they come here and they get their GED, and they graduate as honest students with awards, and it's unbelievable to me the progress that these people make with the support they get here. And
Diana Natalicio is the president of the University of Texas at El Paso, which for many years kind of served as the community college of that segment. It doesn't anymore, but her mantra is, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not, right? Which is, I think you captured that in what you're... I'm sorry, Carl, I'll now be quiet for...
Well, I was going to say Mary's comment kind of leads to this second one, because when we're talking about the students that come at least through the workforce side of the house, a lot of them are coming without a high school diploma, with limited skill sets, and they're an adult learner. And our best practice that we're trying to establish is sort of marrying the workforce side of the house with the career side of the house to say, here's the pathway, here's how we're building in how you can learn while you're working, some of the things that you talked about this morning, and give credentials as you're in the workforce side of the house that can then show you the pathway to the credit side of the house and not make it so fearful. And what we find a lot with the returning adult learner, they come through the workforce side because they just say, okay, I'm not capable of being in the college. I'm just going to go and get a job quickly. Can you help train me to be a CNA? Well, as they're coming in, we're trying to use the academic side of the house, the student service side of the house to say, why isn't this the feeder for that population as well, and why aren't we connecting these people with service learning, with work-based learning, with applied learning, so that and credit, so that they can transfer nicely into the academic side of the house. So I think that's a best practice that we're really putting our arms around right now.
I think as we improve our connection in those two sides of the house to prior learning assessment, it's going to be a big bridge for students to be able to see what they have done or what they're doing maybe while they're students, maybe in jobs they've had for a long time, or other learning that they've had outside of the college as a bridge and as valuable academic experience as well. I would also add, sort of with my other hat of, in terms of developmental ed, I think one thing that we've done over the past couple of years is make changes and reforms to our developmental math and developmental reading and writing courses so that we shorten that pipeline for students and make the experience through those courses one where they are practicing college-level work at every step, not just doing remediation, but really practicing that college-level work, getting a lot of support, and then moving on to be more successful more quickly in the process.
Does everybody here know what you do and what prior learning assessment looks like on the ground?
I guess
Don't
we've
know.
asked.
I'm not sure if they do, but I can talk a little bit about it. So I'm new to this position. We've had prior experiential learning at the college for quite some time, as I'm sure most people know. Prior learning assessment is sort of the more current term, but what it means is that students who have gained skills that are relevant to outcomes of our courses, credit-bearing courses, can, in a number of ways, demonstrate those outcomes, sometimes through a credential that they have, sometimes through a portfolio that they put together with our guidance, and sometimes through CLEP exams or departmental challenge exams or even AP exams that they might have taken in high school can show, thank you, that they've met those outcomes. And so that's what prior learning assessment is.
It's not a magic black box.
No way.
No, but it is a really critical way to help someone who doesn't think that they can do college to validate and give credit where credit is earned. And, you know, our employer, our student, I mean, that's like a perfect example of what are you doing in the workplace that relates to education, and you're coming back as a 40-year-old, you don't want to start taking basic elementary courses, so this gives people a jump start to saying, well, what are they doing in Precise that might be relevant to something that Anthony's teaching in the engineering department, and how can we connect those dots, and how are we doing that more effectively? So we're encouraging the older worker who doesn't have the credentials to come back and give them a little bit of a jump start. And I think that's huge, and I think we're starting to see a big increase in that. We've made a lot of connections from the workforce side to sort of say, well, if you took your CNA with us, Certified Nursing Assistant, what does that equate if you decide you want to go back to college? Well, now we've made a bridge, so they're going to get 6 college credits. So the CNA graduates from the workforce side now become a huge feeder for the college itself, whereas before they just left us and went and got a job. And so we're sort of making a little more clear connections between what people are bringing to us and validating it, because again, as the Department of Higher Ed says, we've got to start looking at giving credit where credit is due.
Another area I think we have done a good job of meeting students with maybe some academic challenges is by offering certificate programs. As Mary said, a lot of students come maybe without having a lot of success in high school or have not been in school for a long time, and to enroll in the 1 year, or well, supposedly 1 year certificate program allows the students to come in and have success. A number of the certificate programs offer some sort of experiential ed component, and when I meet with a lot of those students, they realize that they really will stay for their associate degree, although when they entered, they never thought that they would. And through the supports that they receive at the college and through being able to link it to something that they see in the workforce, they realize they need their associate's degree. It's a nice pathway right into an associate's degree and beyond. So sometimes those certificate programs are a really good entry into the bigger system.
Well, I'd also add that in terms of our programming in general, the fact is that we consistently need to look at our programming and make sure that it leads to an opportunity for the students when they're finished. Whether that's something like we're doing in Catch, where we're supporting the hospitality industry and tourism industry that's growing in southeastern Massachusetts, or our project through PIF with Bridgewater, with the idea is to make sure that the students who start classes here, those credits would transfer and transfer as completely as possible to other institutions. So we need to make sure that we maintain both of our sort of dual responsibilities of preparing people for employment, primarily in southeastern Massachusetts, but around the country, but also opening up those higher ed opportunities for them to continue on to a 4-year or advanced degree beyond that.
And I think, you know, with our employer, and David can speak to this better than I, a lot of what, and you talked about it earlier, we need to figure out lifelong learning too, because what he has is a workforce that needs to constantly be trained. So how are we also helping him train his incumbent workers? And David, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about what we did with some of the training for your current workers.
Yeah, that's a good point. First of all, our average worker is about 47, 48 years old. So the next 15 years, half of our workforce is gone. So we're constantly churning people like Carrie, for example. So without that stream of, you know, you're basically a supplier, needed suppliers, future talent that drives the organization. And on top of that, you know, we ship to 27 countries. Every car, every aircraft will hire parts on it. We have to lower our price every year, and then people talk about quality. Well, you know, 6 Sigma, for example, which we teach in school, is 3.4 defects per million. I ship 4.7 million pieces a day. I'm not going to put 14 cars on the fire. I can't do that. So our people have to be focused on everything we do. Manufacturing for SBC, lean type focuses are always involved. You can't do about that. So whether you're 48 or you're 19, whatever you are, it's a whole process. And you can't do enough of that training. You can't reinforce it enough. I can go on forever.
Okay, the conversation has gone in 2 different ways. One had to do with our students and what we do to help compensate for our students who come in with so many academic and other kinds of needs. How are we assessing the effectiveness of the efforts that we are putting forth? Like, the college classes, the English 91, 92, and the math, and how are we assessing those things? Are we assessing?
We're fairly new to offering, I can speak for reading and writing a little more comfortable talking about that than math. We're fairly new. We had one pilot semester, very small numbers. In the fall, we had more substantial numbers. In this semester, we've increased the number of sections we've offered every semester. So we collect data as we go. Whether it's significant at this point, of course, the numbers are too small to tell, but what we see so far is quite positive in terms of the students that are in these courses and completion rates, retention rates, so on and so forth. So we're looking at that. We also assess qualitative issues. Every semester we do a student survey. We did focus groups during the pilot as well because it was more feasible to do when the numbers were smaller. So we are constantly collecting data. Faculty meet to discuss that information and discuss their own classes on a regular basis. So we do ongoing assessment in that way as well.
Thank you.
We started last year to assess service learning in a very small way by a pre-post test for students that were in classes that were conducted by faculty fellows. So everybody took the pre-test, but only those who opted in to take service learning did the post-test. And we did see some significant results, but we do need to do a lot more of that kind of assessment. This is only the beginning. We plan to continue that. In psychology, on the other hand, we'd used a LEAP rubric for critical thinking to do some evaluation of some student essays this semester, really. And one of the things that we're really looking at is how can we actually come up with some kind of way to instruct all of the adjuncts and so forth that are teaching, like general psychology, for example, what our student learning objectives are and what they mean and how they can operationalize some of those things. So that's a big challenge that we're facing. So I have the two hats and challenges in both areas.
In student services, we're doing more and more assessments. So when we look at the students who have come to orientation or the first next step nights, any of the activities that we're doing to prepare the students, we're collecting data on that in qualitative areas. And we've been able to look at our last 2-year numbers and be able to see that students who come to orientation persist more. We're also looking at assessing when students we've changed everything with advising. So students now go through a group advising. This is the first year new students. They go through a different advising process. As soon as they come out of testing, they have one orientation that is focusing on sort of their career assessments and what's the next step. And then we have 3 other orientations in group advising sessions for them, and we're taking documentation. So hopefully after the end of this year, we'll be able to look back and see how many of our students who have taken these group advising sessions proceed on to the next semester, and then in another year or 2, how many actually graduate, and be able to see the influence that coming and being more prepared through advising on how to use degree works, how to use map works, how to get involved in the college, and taking responsibility for their own careers and working with their advisors.
Is orientation required?
No. No, excuse me, no.
Not in every program, say it that way.
But it should be.
So why not?
We strongly recommend it. And we're getting closer, I think. We're getting closer.
See, if I was the czar of all things, I would require orientation. But if you...
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No, please, I'm leaving at 5 o'clock.
The faculty's been asking that for years.
But it has to be, and it sounds like it is, it has to be worth it. And students have to walk away knowing it's worth it. And when they walk away, for example, with a schedule of classes and a template that assures them that the courses they're taking will count toward what they said they wanted to do and be. I just want to tell a story here. It's not about a community college, but it's about the University of Houston, which takes in about 4,400 transfer students every year, every fall. And the vast majority are coming from the local two-year feeder schools. Now, you have some number of students who are coming here who've taken courses elsewhere, and they don't think they need orientation.
Right.
So we did a kind of a bait and switch. Well, that's not quite the right word. At Houston, only 10% of the 4,400 were coming to the summer orientation program, even though the benefits were clear, because students didn't think they needed it, because they did that once before somewhere. Well, we suggested doing, I think, essentially what you're already doing, and they changed the name of it to advising and registration.
Yeah, that's,
Now, that's different than orientation, because it means that you're going to come and get what you want, which is you want good advice and you want to walk away with a schedule of classes. Now, you do a lot of orientation stuff.
and that's what we do on the testing. We have that whole day
Yeah.
so that they're here for the testing and the registration. And we have implied to the students for the advising that they have to come back for during their fall semester or their first semester, that it's mandatory. So we're implying that this is required. And we've had a really good turnout. And some of you should be noticing when you're doing advising now that students have their plan in the degree works. I've already seen several students, and half of them have had their plans pre-done, so I've been excited about that.
One of the things that Houston discussed, other campuses are doing this too, there's market share here for academic programs. So if you aren't ponied up and you don't have one of your advisors there, your numbers begin to dwindle. It's a fact, but if done well, everybody benefits. So good on you.
Okay, we've heard a bit about how the college is introducing and moving students towards careers, but how do we assess the effectiveness of programs like co-op and service learning to make sure that they're doing some of the things we want?
So I can speak to that, and I'm not sure how many people are from the college or from outside, but very briefly, we have a co-op and internship program on campus, and we're very proud of the fact that it's an academic program, so it is a 3-credit course that students enroll in. The students have to be second-year students, and they need a minimum GPA of 2.5 to enroll in it. The part of the program that we're proud of is not only the relationships we have with employers on the South Coast or in the region, but also that the students are required to take a 1-hour per week seminar that integrates everything they're doing in their work site with what's going on. And in that seminar, we structure it in a way, and I apologize to people who heard me speak last night, we structure it in a way that it really does hit upon a lot of the things that Dr. Koo spoke about of integrating and applying learning. One of the things we do in the classroom in the first few weeks is the students are required to set their own learning objectives, and this is a very new skill for students. They're very used to coming in and having the professor hand them the syllabus and say, this is what you will know by the end of the semester. And we put the students in an uncomfortable, and I say that in a positive way, position of actually having to look at what they know and what they don't know, and they work very closely with their mentor at the work site or at the internship to decide to learn what they don't know, because how do they know what they don't know, because they don't know that. So they sit down with their supervisor, another expert in the field, so now they've had the opportunity to work with all of their faculty for a year who've provided a lot of expertise in a content area, and now they're working with yet another guiding person to look at what they need to know, and they structure their own learning objectives, which is really powerful because they learn how to goal set, they learn how to, and not only how to do it, but how am I going to accomplish that. We do a lot of qualitative and quantitative assessment, so the students are required to keep a reflective journal, and the reflective journal each week has to be related back to some competencies. We give the students a number of prompts that they can speak to in the journal, things like, what have you done in the classroom that you see happening? What is something you learned that you didn't realize you needed to know that now that you're at your internship, you realized was a good thing to learn? So they do a lot of relating back of where they see examples of things, and there is feedback. So the journals are handed in, and the faculty person provides feedback. At the end of the semester, the students are required to write a final paper, and they have to close the loop of did they accomplish those learning goals, did they meet them? If they didn't meet them, that's fine. We all know that things happen in goal setting, and you have to be able to change that. They just need to speak to why it didn't happen. So it's okay that it didn't, but what would you change? What would you do differently? And then finally, the students are asked to assess themselves, and they get the same assessment that their supervisor gets. And after they complete both of them, I require my class to sit down with their supervisor and go over it to see, are they in line with what a supervisor is thinking? And then they have to write a reflective piece comparing and contrasting what they learned at that. Finally, we do an exit exam survey, which asks students all about skill gain. And of course, it's self-reported, but we look at a lot of skill gain. Did you improve your ability to goal set? Are you more clear and focused about your career and your academic future? Did you improve your interpersonal skills? And these are all things that link back to the core competencies that they're looking at in their journal, as well as what employers are telling us students need. So it kind of goes back to a little of Dr. Koo was saying. It doesn't matter if they're majoring in philosophy or English or something as technical as engineering. It matters what they're gleaning from that and how they can transfer that knowledge and that skill into the work site. So we do maybe a little too much evaluation. I went to a conference that talked about how do you actually present this information, and part of the challenge is now looking at what do we need to do with that information. We report to multiple different places. We've got the college learning, the strategic plan. We also receive money from Perkins, so we need to report on that. So we're looking now at how to structure this where we can actually find out what the students are learning and how we can kind of streamline this and use the data that we actually gather.
And I think one of the most effective ways of demonstrating this is the
the
success story
Sarahs. Now I'd like
we have
Sarah
at
to
our
say
table, because I think from an employer perspective, are we really meeting the needs when we're sending a co-op student to an employer? And Carrie, what does it feel like?
I think to touch up on what Nicole said, it seems like a lot of assessment, but it was all necessary, I think, to kind of close the loop on the whole process, because it shows you at the end of the day, this is what the point of my classes are, and that they all do relate, because when you think back on it to write the journals, we do try to touch up on, oh, I remember learning this in business law, and I heard about it in this meeting that I attended, so it was a good close to the loop of why I went to college, and that it wasn't a waste of time or money, that it all made sense at the end of the day. And it also made the transition easier into not only what can a company give to me, but what can I bring to the company.
I think Nicole talks about some of the bright spots in our assessment system, but also highlights one of the sort of glaring faults. The fact is we do assessment across campus in a lot of different ways. We all in the classroom do assessment quite regularly, but they appear to be what I would describe as islands of assessment, where certain programs may look over see how effective they are, but it really doesn't inform our other programs on campus, and it doesn't really feed into our other assessment activities. One of the things that the OAK Committee has been striving to do is to develop a system of assessment that's campus-wide. So information, for example, that would come from Nicole's co-op would be fed back into program review, or potentially could be used in the grant development process, or potentially be used to really direct our strategic planning. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have a really good systematic approach. So while we are collecting data, and in a lot of cases there's some very well-informed programs on campus, it's not being used as effectively as possible. And that's something we're really going to try to strive to do in the coming year. Not to really generate more work for individuals, but to actually avoid a lot of the repeat work that goes on. I'm very familiar with the program review process. We, for example, during the program review process, many program coordinators go out and survey employers. Well, the fact is we have strong survey data from employers already from other sources on campus. The problem is they just haven't been necessarily connected. So I think what we really need to do with our system is sort of connect the dots and then use best practices across multiple programs and have those all sort of integrated together in the long run.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, from my perspective, it's real simple. If we like the product, we buy the product. We go out here. It's not yet complicated. We use our methods. I mean, if it's one third, two thirds, how to improve mess up if they reject, so we keep doing it. And I'll do all the evaluation pretty soon.
So how does BCC communicate what we know about careers and the job market to students? And part of that comes through co-op and through service learning, but how else?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do with the workforce side of the house is to use the labor market information when we're talking about programs. So if you want to be in advanced manufacturing, what's the job opportunity out there based on the labor market information? What is the wage that you can anticipate? Where do you start if you just leave from a workforce training piece versus getting the full associate degree, and what's the difference in what job opportunities you have? So we're trying to embed it in the front end when students who are not quite ready for the college environment are coming into us to think about what careers they want to do. And the more we're dovetailing the job market information, we're just working right now because the casinos are an emerging industry, and we're working with the academic side of the house to encourage people to get into that industry. But it's really important for them to understand, what does that mean? It's new. What does it mean if I want to work in the gaming industry? How many jobs are there going to be? Well, we just found out at a meeting Monday, there's going to be 500 jobs coming up in Plainville. Well, how do we get that information out to people, and what are the job skill sets that they need to get those jobs, and how much money are they going to make? So I think we have to start communicating that information and helping people understand, if you start here and do it, you can make this, and yes, the jobs are coming, but if you get your associate's degree, you can make this, and continue on in that same industry. So we have to start looking at that labor market and how we get that information out to people on a regular basis.
In student services, we've been able, it starts right at the day of testing when the student comes in, and they're starting to be introduced to what their opportunities are, what careers are available. We have them doing the Harlan Code. It's a little inventory that happens. And the students start to see and connect what are some of the opportunities that they have in the workforce. And that has a difference. We also have our career and placement areas. You'll see the job fairs around campus. We work to send out a lot of emails that you may not see that the student sees about career development, and that goes through their Access BCC account. And so we're also working with a workforce development, and we send an advisor over to meet with some of the non-credit programs such as CNA to talk about advising and where they could go with their career and how we can offer them things like converting the CNA graduates into having credit classes. And we're looking at becoming, doing more with our testing areas so that students can get the credentials after they finish their certificates right on campus, so they don't have to go to Boston or out of state.
I would also say it's common practice among our career programs to integrate information about career opportunities and jobs in that particular discipline, whether it's engineering or health sciences or criminal justice, the list goes on and on. The fact is that it is an essential component of that education to understand what the workplace looks like. So I could list many different programs that bring in speakers, that bring in employers, that go to regular site visits. Next week we'll be having our advisory committee recognition dinner. Many of the programs on campus, I would say 25 to 30 programs on campus, have advisory committees that go out with local employers to bring them in regularly to inform them. Numerous curriculum changes that are done over the years are directly related to employment information and changes in the workplace. So the fact is we do try to stay as current as possible. It is challenging. One aspect, as everyone is familiar with our curriculum development process, is it's a time-consuming process. It's important for it to be rigorous, but it does take time. And one of the solutions to solving that problem, to be able to make us that much more agile and quicker in our response, is to work with Terry's area. The fact is non-credit can develop programs very quickly, so we can do things that are short-term solutions that eventually can lead to long-term solutions in terms of curriculum changes. So I do think we do a very good job currently. In terms of connecting with employers, we can definitely do better, but many of our faculty and program coordinators take an active role in making sure that our curriculum is current with employment needs.
One of the other things that we too see is, whether it's with the Center for Teaching and Learning, or it's been exciting to see the faculty do this experiential learning in their classrooms. And I've been very fortunate to be invited to many different things. One of the ones I will tell you about how students can see themselves in using what they're learning. The Bio 234, I've been several times to Brown University to their cadaver lab. And I have to tell you that when you actually get to see a human body and hold some of those body parts, you really understand why you're taking Bio 234. And I've been to water treatment plants and all of those things, or I guess the dumpsters. I think all of those things, and I think it's the intentional beginning when you're going into your class and saying, what can I do that's really going to have an impact on my students? And it doesn't have to be something that's expensive or over the top. It just has to be meaningful and passionate to you, and then it's passionate to the students. And I think our intentionalness as a college to keep looking for ways to help our students and to help our staff be able to do some of these accomplishments are really important.
I think it's important too, the largest number of students who go here are enrolled in liberal arts and general studies. And I think it's the nature of the college to separate career from a general education or more of a humanities type of background or a liberal arts background. And I think that's a real problem. I don't see the two areas as mutually exclusive, and it doesn't have to be an either or, and I think that's what we struggle with a little bit with college, that maybe if you're talking about career, then it doesn't seem like it's maybe as academically rigorous, or, and I think that, I don't know if this is true, but I heard a statistic that the large majority of people who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies prior to their MBA, which is a very specialized degree, majored in English or philosophy. And I think it's very important for us to know that the students who are transferring to a four-year school, who plan to go on for master's degrees, who are majoring in liberal arts, also can be exposed to experiential ed without it having to be, quote-unquote, a work program. I have a good friend who got his degree in sculpture and philosophy, and his joke is, all the philosophy firms weren't hiring when I graduated. So, I mean, that doesn't mean, we certainly, when you're looking at a career or experiential ed, we certainly are not trying to drive people out of majoring in those areas, but just everyone's going to need to find a job at some point, and it's exposing them to the types of things that you can do with a liberal arts background. I mean, the distinction is, it's very clear when you're majoring, you come in and you're majoring as accounting, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to be an accountant or work in that field, but really exposing the largest number of our students here, liberal arts and general studies students, give them some sort of exposure, which is then going to connect it to make what they're doing more meaningful. And I think that's something we could really work on a little bit more.
Now, Terry, you did the Zeiterian Theater with, well, you tell them what you did, because I think that fits in very cool with
Yeah, so part of what we tried to do in New Bedford, there's the Zeiterian Theater, and there was a lot of effort to try to connect the dots between what they're doing, and they run a lot of educational programs, and so we were able to connect their educational programs to faculty who were able to go to the play and then meet afterwards with the people who either put on the play themselves, the actors, and or the director of the theater, to sort of connect how this play may have related to a history course or a sociology course. And we did a really interesting model with how to attend a play. And it was co-taught by our theater director and the director from the Zeiterian, and it focused on how do you as an audience go to a one-person play. So they prepared for that, and then they went to it, and they were more ready to understand that versus going to a larger performance. So there were ways that we did faculty exchanges, and I was thinking when when Nicole was talking, we're also trying to do more faculty externships. How do we get faculty into David's company so that they get a firsthand experience on what's going on in a manufacturing setting in today's world, as opposed to a manufacturing setting maybe when they worked in manufacturing? And how do we get not only students to get into the workplace, which I think Carrie's a perfect example of, but how do we also do that for faculty? Because, as David said earlier, the workplace is rapidly changing, so how are we doing that? So I think there's a lot more that can be done, and I think it's easier for a faculty member to talk to a student about what's happening in the marketplace if they've had an opportunity to be in that marketplace, whether it's advanced manufacturing, whether it's culinary, whether it's in the healthcare field. It's easier for them to say, oh, wow, I was on David's floor the other day, and I never thought about this particular job he had. And if we start teaching this in the classroom, people might want to go into advanced manufacturing in a different way. I don't know, David, you want to add anything?
That's spot on. You nailed it.
I think one thing that Nicole brings up is the duality of the experience that many of our students have here. If they've gone into a career program, if they've gone into, say, engineering or criminal justice or nursing, they oftentimes have a relatively strong relationship with faculty members. They have a vision on where they're going to be. They often have good guidance in terms of careers. And in terms of overall success and overall performance, our data shows that those students do very well. Unfortunately, a large portion of our population are in liberal arts or general studies or undeclared, and they don't share those same benefits. They don't necessarily have those connections. They don't have those connections to the workforce. So we have been making strides, or we have been striven to make changes in those, in that instruction. Whether it starts with contextualized learning in our developmental ed, we're trying to show how the developmental math, for example, feeds into workforce skills, or for that matter, the Pathways projects that many of you have been involved with the idea of trying to get students who come in instead of into a very general experience to try to get them guided down one somewhat directed path, whether it's going to be catch or STEM or health careers. If we can find the student and start them down that path, they can start to benefit from many of those services that we already have that they're not being connected with right now.
I'm going to add that as a student, I came in as a general studies student and then ended up being kind of guided more into the office administration role. And then it was once I got into that program, I noticed it was a big change and it's more guided. You have a lot more one-on-one time with your teachers when you're in a smaller program, and that kind of helps because they know you personally, and then they help you career-wise. They know more or less your skill set and where you want to be, so they help guide you in that right direction.
And how did you get connected to Mr. Slutz over there?
I met with Nicole once about the co-op program because it was a requirement for my area, and then she said, well, where do you want to be going into this? I was completely open-minded. She had happened to just hear from Precise about the opening, so I went into the interview open-minded. It was something I had never really thought of going into the manufacturing field, even though it's in human resources. It wasn't something I really had ever considered. Nicole introduced me to everyone at Precise, and it's turned into what it is now.
Okay, this question is probably for this end of the table, I think. What can we do to strengthen and grow our connections with regional businesses and industries? I think you've addressed part of that, but what else can we do?
I think events like this is a start. I mean, so we get together to talk, listen on your side what we actually want. And having the folks come out and see us and around us. My first job was in 1995, so we have no less time than an hour to do it.
think one of the other things we're trying to do is, under Jack's leadership, we started the Workforce Education Institute, and we very strategically called it Workforce Education Institute to connect things. But what we're trying to do is have a place, one stop, where an employer can call and say, I'd like X, I'd like a co-op student, I'd like some training for my incumbent worker, I'd like to be on a panel with you, I'd like to be on an advisory board. Have one place where they can call them and we can funnel that out. But while we're doing that, also have the opposite. So if Nicole's going out to get a co-op site, can she also say, oh, would you like to be on an advisory board? Oh, do you need any training? Oh, would you like the workforce people to go in and assess your needs? So we're trying to lure employers in because we have such richness that we want to offer employers, but it's really hard to get to all of them in a concise way where we're selling all of our services at once. So we're trying to produce like little postcards that are on the back of this to sort of say, well, would you like to host an information center session? Would you be willing to have a faculty member come and tour your company with a group of students that might be in an English class, but might get something out of going into a manufacturing? So we're trying to figure out what is it that we can lure employers in, because some employers in the community don't use us. Some, like David, use us on a regular basis in the workforce side, in the co-op side. Some have service learning opportunities, but then there's this whole other group that don't access the community college. And when we go in there, whether it's Jack going in there for a meeting or, you know, Nicole going in there for a co-op, they say, oh, wow, you do all of these other things? We had no idea. So one of the things that we find with community colleges, we're not good about bragging about ourselves. And we need to sort of change that because we do really cool things and not all employers know that. So I think we have to figure out a way to brag a little bit better.
And I think as faculty and staff, we're the ambassadors of the college. And so when you have a really great idea, share it with your colleagues because we can probably find a workforce opportunity for you to connect with. And because we know where the companies that are really good, and we're willing to go out and meet companies and build relationships if it would fit into your curriculum.
Terry, that's a good point, though. If you don't make it easy for us,
Right.
we got a million things going on. Don't make it work for me, or I won't do it.
Well, I guess, David, the other thing is, what are we missing that you need that we're not connecting the dot with? Because I think that's part of what we need to hear.
In terms of what? Structure? In terms of
Anything, really.
personnel? You know my list is pretty simple.
I know.
Oh, that's right.
You want my
But they
list?
don't know it.
Oh, you want the list? I'll
Yeah.
give you the- Okay. Now, I'm not everybody, I get that. I'm a pretty simple guy. We have 380 people in the company. We have every function you can think of, every age, every diversity, every language. What we're looking for is, like, you know, this fine person here. She gets up, she shows up, she follows up every single day. I don't have to babysit her. If I have to babysit you, be your mother, I'm not your mother. Get off your phone, look me in the eye, and have a conversation. What a concept. I don't really care what you're posting online right now. Don't do it at the office. And don't say something about the office on some online website, because I don't want to read about it either. So, you know, you're get beyond that. We have adults that have the same issue. That just drives me crazy. Don't do that. Work as a team, right? Whether you're working with me, or doing town meetings, or you're working with your boss, who, by the way, her boss, the HR director, came from accounting. So, basic math. I got people that, you know what, if you know what the margin has to be, when you have the cost, can you tell me what the sell price is? Can you work backwards? I have to teach basic math to people. I mean, my best class in college was life science calculus. How do you calculate velocity versus this versus that? And you could apply the math into the real world. Basic algebra skills. I don't need trigonometry. In some cases geometry, but basic algebra. Can you write a concise email? I mean, I read these reports, no offense, from these academic groups. I'm not reading 40 pages. I'm reading a page, and you've already lost me after that. You better bullet point things. Can you handle conflict? HR is a prime example. Not everybody comes to HR is happy about things, and you have to be able to calm these folks down, whether it's a phone call or whatever, interpersonal things, and, you know, as we talked about yesterday, don't Don't manage the blame, manage the gap. We have a gap that caused a problem, fix the gap. I don't care what functional area it is and fix it, and our people can do that. Organizational skills, can you manage your projects? Again, I'm not going to follow up on emails. So you get assigned stuff by Bob, you get it done, right? We have an average of 27 employees to 1 supervisor. I'm not going to hire more overhead to babysit people. It makes no sense. My customers won't even pay for it. So we expect you to work independently, figure out your own work, and own your work. Like Carrie does. Can you multitask? Yeah, there's a lot of different hats you're going to wear. You do that every single day very well. I don't know how you teach that. I don't know how you interview for that. And not to stereotype, but I have a lot of working mothers. You know working mothers can do it. They're balancing a lot in their lives. You're not a working mother yet, but you have that ability to multitask because things are going to come at you from all angles. You don't sit there like this. Carrie's at a desk all day long. People like me are bugging her. You're going to have to multitask. You have to be even-keeled. Don't get too high, don't get too low. Don't be like a young sales guy. You get your first PO, you're high. You lose your next PO, you're low. Everything's like this. It's a journey. You're not going to accomplish everything all in that same week. And I think I pretty much covered it all. But the cultural piece is the biggest piece of our companies. You know, you're going to go somewhere else probably, and they're not as, let's say, nice or as open or whatever. We're pretty casual, right? So you have to adjust your game accordingly, which you can do that. So fast, friendly, and flexible always helps as well. That's a long list, Terry. Sorry about that.
It's okay, we like it.
The one thing you can't do for us, though, is don't send me a survey to say, well, what do you need? I'm not filling it out. Terry comes to my office or Jack comes in, I'll sit and talk to you for half an hour, but I'm not going to fill a survey. I get so many surveys and phone calls, we're not doing it. So,
So you didn't fill out that survey I sent you last week?
I was gone.
Don't worry, she'll send you another.
Yeah.
Speaking of surveys, I just want to interrupt for a second. We're almost out of time. There should have been evaluations passed out in here.
David's not gonna fill it out.
If they weren't passed out, were they? Okay. We should have 2 people standing at the back doors when the session ends to collect them, so if you wouldn't mind filling them out. Kathy, do you want to say something?
Do we have a minute or two, Kyle? Does anyone in the audience have any questions for us? Is it an easy one, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's-
I'd like someone to address college's focus on students who come from non-collegiate environments. In other words, they either are coming from the country directly, perhaps have language barriers, or are local as well. But in their prior lives, college has not ever been in consideration. What do we do to be certain that the mechanism of the college does not impede their assimilation into what we like to think is a growing collegiate environment? What do we do? In other words, before the testing, how do we get to those students who perhaps don't speak or have a facility with English? How do we get to them? And how do we make sure that the mechanism of the college does not impede their progress, but rather makes their assimilation into collegiate life, into our college family, something that is special, so that all of a sudden they wake up and they are college students?
I think that we excel in that area, both from the academic side, because we have a credit ESOL program that actually engages individuals. We have an upward bound program that actually takes individuals from wherever they are and brings them to where they want to be. And I think that on the workforce side and the relationship that we've been able to, the marriage that the workforce side is making with the academic and student service side, is saying all students need to be treated exactly the same, no matter where they come into the institution. They need to be able to get an associate's degree if that's their goal. And we are building and surrounding them with all the support services and all the guidance and all the career pathways and the experiences, work-based learning, service learning, whatever, along the way to help them be able to do that. So in my view of what I've seen, both on the academic side and the workforce side, that's what we do, and that's what Bristol is all about. And I think that that's why we are so successful, because we do take people, no matter where they are, and get them to where they want to be in a very embracing way, if that doesn't sound too corny.
We're also doing a lot more, you're going to see in the fall in New Bedford, to be doing more reaching out with our English as a second language population because it's such a large population. And I think as the faculty who see the students every single day, as they can start to look at the students, as you talked about the social issues, those are the biggest reasons why things get in the way and students aren't succeeding. So if we can help them feel connected, that's going to help more than the fact that they've come from another background. How do we make them connected to the college?
Well, you connect through others.
Yep.
You don't connect to the college per se as a
It's
structure.
the community, the college community.
Yeah, and that's why things like learning communities and the small first-year seminar, taught well, creates that kind of social fabric that, you know, David used the word culture about his organization. I mean, you've got a culture at Bristol, and the other colleges too here, but every classroom develops something akin to that. How do we interact? How do we relate to one another here? Who belongs? Who doesn't? You know, fundamental cultural issues, and we're all responsible for that.
We have time for one more question, then we have to break this up. Go ahead.
Hello. Whether you represent a community college or a four-year institution, I have a question regarding if we say that we want to be fair to all students, why do we not make certain items such as high-tech practices mandatory so that all students have a bite of that particular pie? Why do we make things so optional, whether we're talking about orientation? Students will opt out of doing something unless we make it mandatory. So I have issues with students that are given too much choices of opting out of something. Because I truly believe that experiential learning, whether it's internships, service learning, whether it's a job shadow for a day before a student does an internship or a co-op, I think we need to be looking at making things mandatory and required. And I just want to throw one more thing out that I want to say. The president at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts, he won board about 6 years ago. He changed the entire curriculum at his institution. Students are required to do 3 internships and a study abroad between their 4 years at that school. It has changed the matrix and the data that he is collecting from his institution, and his students are all getting employed. Why aren't we following that lead?
I'll answer that question. The fact is, what's the tuition at Endicott College? Okay, extremely expensive. The fact is, the resources that we put towards internships and co-ops, we have an excellent program there. The fact is, if we were to try to mandate 3 internships or co-ops, that would mean in the span of a few years, we'd have to have 30,000 internships and co-ops available. How many internships and co-ops do we have now? 250. Okay? If we want to scale that up, we have a staff of 2 full-time people. So to scale that 250 to 30,000 is we'd need I don't know, I can't do the math fast. Craig, can you help me? We'd have to hire 30, 40, maybe 50 people. I graduated from RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. They mandated 5 co-ops that you had to have. We had a co-op building staffed with about 25 people. It was a fantastic experience. Their tuition is $40,000 a year. If we want to do that, that's fine, but we cannot do it with the resources we currently have.
Too bad you ended with the Endicott example.
But
if you'd have stopped,
Yeah, really.
if you'd have stopped there and said, what about orientation? What about a commitment to deepening what makes a high impact practice a high impact in a first-year seminar or in some of the required gen ed or other courses? What about taking work seriously and bending the curriculum of certain courses so that there's more emphasis on the transferability? I mean, I'm using work, when I use work, I'm really talking about work, community, family relations. I'm talking about the kinds of lifelong skills and proficiencies that we want our students to have. So I think there are things that we can do better on the less, I was going to say cheap, but on the less expensive.
Cost effective. No, and I will say that, but your question is, the idea of mandatory is problematic on this campus. If all of you have dealt with students that if you making something mandatory would prevent someone from completing it for one reason or another. So there will be people that will not be able to complete it for one reason or another. I will say that, for example, orientation, we are definitely on the path to mandatory orientation at some point in time.
We're sure implying it.
We're certainly implying it. We're certainly doing multiple programs. And we've had many people involved. We're probably also on the path of mandatory service learning or some type of experiential learning. So we will solve that problem and we will do it. I think at this point, for example, with co-op and for that matter with service learning, what we need to do as the initial stages is make sure it's an option for all of our students, increase our opportunities, develop greater connections with employers and start down that path. And at some point I think we can get there, but it's hard to go from 250 to 30,000 in a short time. No, it's too good to let go. So.
This option be possible, that every single student that enters Bristol or any school is required to make one phone call to an employer, and they have to create their own job shadow for 1 day when they're home during winter break. It's required.
Right.
Why can't they do that? They learn from all of us how to approach an employer, how to be professional when they're here for the first time and they're trying to navigate the campus. So why can't they be accountable for making that phone call, creating their own job shadow that can open doors with that possible employer to an internship or to a part-time job from that job shadow? Why can't we do something like that?
Those are good questions, but I'm afraid we're going to have to stop this. The next session starts in 7.5 minutes. If you wouldn't mind filling out your evaluations and leaving them in the back with... So, a hand. Thank you, panelists.